Hey guys, and welcome to my YouTube channel. So this is actually my first ever video. I have been putting it off for quite some time now, so I hope it's not too boring, but I thought what better way to kick off my very first YouTube video than to delve into the glutes. And if you don't already follow me, check out my Instagram because I post daily content and all things to do with fitness, tips, and technique. So I wanted to break down the 5 common mistakes that I see people making when it comes to building their glutes. Mistake number 1 is only performing squat-based movement patterns. If you know me, you know that I love squats, but when it comes to building glutes, you do need to incorporate other movements as well. The 3 planes that you need to focus on with glute building are the axial plane, also known as vertical, so straight up and down. So this is your squats and your deadlifts and your lunges. You also need to focus on horizontal movements. This is things like glute bridges, hip thrusts, back extensions, and reverse hypers. And the 3rd plane that you need to focus on is the lateral plane, so any movement going sidewards. This is your crab walks and your abduction movements. So for the ultimate glute workout, ensure all 3 of these are being incorporated. The number 2 common mistake that I see is people not implementing progressive overload. So progressive overload is king, or queen in this instance, when it comes to building muscle. Without progressive overload, so without a new stressor being placed on the body, there is no reason to grow, to adapt, or to get stronger. This is why it's important to not change up your workouts too frequently. This is a really big mistake that I see people making, and it's changing up the workouts every single day and every single week. If you change up the exercises too frequently, your body doesn't have time to adapt that new exercise and you don't get a chance to implement progressive overload to it. So for my girls, and what I do personally is I do my programs for 4 weeks at a time. 4 weeks, implement as much progressive overload as you can over those 4 weeks, and then you can look at changing the workouts and the program. And just a little bit more on progressive overload if you're unsure of what it is. Progressive overload is adding a new stress to the exercise. So this could be adding more weight, performing more reps, performing more sets, shortening up the rest times, changing up the time under tension of the exercise, or the tempo of the movement being executed. So progressive overload doesn't necessarily mean trying to increase the weights every single week. There are lots of other ways that you can implement it. Mistake number 3 is not enough frequency. So how many times the glutes are being trained per week. For majority of us, when it comes to building muscle, we need to stimulate that muscle at least 2 times per week, if not 3 times per week, for muscle growth. So if you're only performing 1 leg day every 7 days, it's probably not going to be enough stimulus on that muscle to build. So I always recommend at least 2 sessions per week, sometimes 3. Number 4 is not varying up the rep ranges enough. So a higher rep range is only being performed. While this isn't completely wrong, the glutes also do respond well to lower reps and a heavier weight as well. So don't be afraid to lift heavy when it comes to the glutes. Awesome exercises that you can load up lots and perform low reps on is the glute bridge and the hip thrust. So along with your higher rep work, also consider in some lower reps, heavier weight. I'm recording this video whilst the gyms are currently closed, so I know that can be hard, but when we go back to training in the gyms, take this into consideration. And last but not least is an insufficient protein intake each day. So protein is the only macronutrient our body cannot store, and it is required to maintain, build, and prevent the breakdown of muscle tissue. So if you are looking at building muscle and preserving your muscle, which I think that's the goal for majority of us, I'd highly recommend that you're hitting a minimum daily protein target. I recommend a protein target of 1.6 to 2.2 grams to every kilogram of body weight. Anyone that knows me and follows me know that I'm a massive stickler for technique when it comes to executing exercises. So I've popped in how to properly execute the hip thrust and the 5 key tips on what to implement into the exercise so you can maximize your results. These are my 5 top tips on how to improve your hip thrust. So first things first, you want the top of the couch or top of the bench to be sitting just below the shoulder blades, or a good guide can be where the bra strap usually sits across your back. So my bra strap or bottom of my shoulder blades are on the bench. If I'm too far away, I'm not really able to get into full hip extension, and if I'm too close, that's when I'm going to get that lumbar extension happening in the lower back. So shoulder blades are just on the bench. Step 2 is where you're looking and where the placement of the neck and the body should be. So in a thrust, think about just the bottom half of the body moving. So as you come up, that upper body just rocks backwards and forwards. So it stays completely still. So my chin is tucked in, the eye line is forward, the rib cage is down. The minute the rib cage flares, as in this space lengthens, that is no longer going to be using the glutes to the full potential. So the upper torso stays still throughout the whole movement. Nice straight line. So think chin tucked in, eye line forward, rib cage down. Step 3 is placement of the feet. So for a hip thrust, you roughly want the knees to be at a 90-degree angle when you're at full hip extension. So hip extension is when the hips are lengthened. Hip flexion, hip extension. So the knees are going to be at a 90-degree angle. If they're too close, and I'm doing it here, it's going to be a hell of a lot more quad. If I do them really far away, that's going to get my hamstrings a whole lot more. I can already feel that in my hamstrings. So to get the glutes, optimally, knees at a 90-degree angle at full hip extension. Step 4 is how far apart and how your feet should be positioned. To be honest, this is going to be a personal preference. Have a play around with what works for you. Some people feel their glutes more when their toes are forward and slightly closer. Other people like to have their hips slightly wider and toes turned out. For me, my sweet spot is where I would perform my squat. So my toes are slightly turned out and my feet are just outside hip width. It's going to be a personal preference. So just have a play around with where feels ideal for you and where you feel your glutes the most. Step 5 is ensuring that you're holding the position throughout the movement. To maximize the use of the glutes, you don't want to overextend that lower back. So if I'm coming up and if I'm doing my thrust like this, so you can see that my lower back's tucking under and my rib cage is flared. So this means that the abdominals are going to be switched off and the lower back is having to kick in to assist. What we want to do is think about thrusting up towards the ceiling. So tuck that bum underneath. Even if you come up to this starting position and just practice rocking your hips backwards and forwards, you will feel the difference. So the minute that I bring my rib cage down, tuck my pelvis up towards the ceiling, I can immediately feel those glutes switching on. So we're holding that same position in the back throughout the whole movement. You're not letting the bum try and touch the floor first. Imagine that you're trying to get your tailbone to the floor as opposed to the bum cheeks. Tailbone to the floor. There are 5 tips you can start to implement into your hip thrust to make sure you're getting the most out of that body weight exercise.